Welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus with Bob Mendelsohn.
Exodus chapter 31 tonight. One of the oddest credit cards I ever received was from the U.S. Department Megastore, which in that day was called Sears and Roebuck. Now it's just called Sears. The store, mind you, is not odd, nor is the card. The store is very much like David Jones or Meyer. It has quite substantial goods and a wide range of products. In fact, their advertising slogan used to be, Sears has everything. It had a whole section for men called Tools. My, oh my, was it stocked. The home brand of their tools was called Craftsman, and the guarantee they had on each tool was for a lifetime. So if your Craftsman hammer ever broke, or your saw ever broke, you could return it, no questions asked. They would immediately replace it. So you ask, well, what made this the odd credit card? Well, the answer for anyone who knows me is that it was sent to me. Look, I'm not the handiest man out there. That's in fact being very generous. I already described some of that in my initial conversation about the tabernacle some weeks ago. So in today's lesson, as we read from Exodus 31 about the two master craftsmen, Bezalel and Oholiab, I'm humbled again. I'm impressed that anyone knows anything about fixing just about anything, and these men knew the lot. By the way, tonight we'll also talk about the Sabbath, which God seems to spend much time in Exodus addressing. And finally, I'll tell you what Yeshua was writing on the ground in John chapter 8. So we'll plow into Exodus 31. So we Jewish people are called the chosen people. And that's evident from Abraham in Genesis 12 and following. And it's written by God for us in Deuteronomy chapter 7 as well. Sometimes we wonder about this idea of chosenness. Does that imply betterness, or does it make those of the Goyim, the nations around us, worse or second class? I'm going to help you uncover that by looking at these two men, Bezalel and Oholiab. By the way, because you're wondering, their names translate respectively into God's protecting shadow and tent of Father. So the Bible says God chose them. Let's look at this text, Exodus 31. The Bible says God chose Bezalel and Oholiab. He anointed them. And it says concerning Bezalel that God filled him with three things. See them? Wisdom, discernment, and knowledge or skill. Chachma, Vitvuna, and Da'at. Knowledge, skill. By stating all three and listing the entirety of the products needed to be fashioned and woven and produced, God is being comprehensive. Nothing that's been listed in the last 6 chapters is going to be picked up at Sears. Someone named Bezalel is going to make it all. These three words of wisdom, discernment, and knowledge or skill may mean this. Let me try to explain the differences between them by quoting a guy named John Durham, who wrote the commentary that I fancy in the book of Exodus. He said this: wisdom is the gift to understand what's needed to fulfill God's instructions. I say, wisdom is seeing things from God's point of view. Durham says, discernment is the talent for solving the inevitable problems involved in the creation of so complex a series of objects and materials. And skill, or knowledge, is the experienced hand needed to guide and accomplish the labor itself. Now, one of the things of note about being chosen is the co-selection of Oholiab. I want you to notice this particularly in verse 6. What does it say? God tells Moses, and behold, I myself have appointed with him Oholiab, and in the hearts of all who are skillful I've put skill, that they may make all that I've commanded you. So the notion of being chosen is not an exclusive enterprise. It's a territory which widens every time we don't imagine it. God's selections are always particular, and they're constant. Yes, he chose Israel, and watch out, he just might choose others as well. We get stuck in time. God is ever surprising us. Here's what I mean. Bezalel was chosen. That's obvious. And he was chosen on the basis of his own particular capacities and God's continual choices. That could be, but isn't, the end of the story. Bezalel could write a book. He could sell videos about his being God's chosen craftsman. That could have been the title. But God widened the choice. He expanded the included group with Oholiav. Note the Hebrew. Va'ani hine natati ito et Oholiav. The repeating of the unnecessary ani helps us understand God's direct involvement. I have chosen. He didn't need to say it. He even uses the word hine, which he didn't need to use. Don't miss this. Hine means don't miss this. Behold, or don't miss this. God personally involves himself and gives Oholiav. To whom is he giving this man? Of first importance, he's giving Oholiav to Bezalel. Beza needs to receive this gift from God first. In other words, the craftsman needs to receive his assistant. He's going to be Bezalel's offsider, and that's no little thing. Think of it this way. God is saying to Bezalel, you're not the only man on the planet who can accomplish this major project. No, you're not going to get glory from this work to which I'm calling you. God is saying, you will be involved, yes, and very seriously, but the tabernacle is mine. The presence is mine. The work is going to be shared. And you have to admit your need of Oholiav and receive him, and all these others who are listed here who are going to be skillful and brought near. And so it is as Jewish people that we are chosen. But we're not, however, to imagine ourselves as more significant or more relevant than the nations around us. We're not better. They are not worse. And listen, it wasn't only Bezalel and Oholiav, was it? Look at verse 24 to 29. We look at the crew that were also called alongside, and they were all who are skillful. Do you see that word in verse number 6? I myself have appointed him, really the Hebrew is Natan, meaning given him, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan. Interesting, two different tribes are picked here, right? What was Bezalel from?
Judah.
From Judah. So Judah and Dan. Dan is the most northerly tribe, and Judah the most southerly. So it's the comprehensive picture, right? He's taking, if you will, a Queenslander from Townsville and a Mexican from Melbourne, right? That's what he's doing. He'll take everybody. So the whole country is represented. And in verse 6, in the hearts of all who are skillful, and that's the word chacham, meaning wise, I've put chachma, put wisdom, that they may all make what I've commanded you. So the building of the tabernacle is to be done by one guy, and his assistant, and all these other people. So to accomplish this project of the Mishkan, it would take the entire crew of God's senior craftsmen and women. That's why Bezalel can't sit back and say, hey, I'm chosen. Oholiav can't say, yeah, I'm right there, right up next to the big guy. Because everybody who's skillful, men and women, according to chapter 35, had to be sewing and working and carving and building. One more thing on these chosen people. They were already skilled. In other words, they didn't get new skills when God said, I tell you what, let's build this altar and all these things that were listed. Do you know anything about sewing? You don't. That's all right. I'll anoint you. See what I mean? In other words, he doesn't choose unskilled people. He chooses skilled people. God had chosen their careers, if you will, by giving them skill and wisdom. Look, I read this from the Sydney Morning Herald on how to give your babies advantage. This is important. Quote, children of women who eat fish regularly during pregnancy develop better language and communication skills, research has revealed. British and U.S. researchers analyzed the diets of 7,000 prospective mothers before looking at the development of their offspring at a year and a half. They found that by the age of 18 months, those children whose mothers ate regular meals of fish had better language and social skills compared with those mothers who did not eat fish. End quote. No matter how we advantage our children or our parents, it's still up to the Almighty to fashion them, that they might fashion the things to which they're called. So learn your skills, develop your skills, and God may call you to build a Mishkan down the road. So the second section tonight, besides the choice of these fellows and the idea of chosenness, is that there's a chosen day for separation. We'll carry on here in reading verse 12 The last two verses is the famous V'shamru from the Shemona Esrei. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam b'rit olam v'niyuvein b'nei Yisrael. So you hear this in the liturgy, and it's straight out of this text. So the second section of today's lesson is the teaching again about Shabbat. Before either your guns get reloaded and you oppose whatever the law teaches and quote Galatians, or to you're glad that I'm finally getting to such a serious topic, which is your own hobby horse, let me say from the top, Sabbath was made for man. Anything less than that, or in your eyes more than that, simply wrong. We are not made for Sabbath. We are designed and made for God. He gives us a day off to enjoy and to rest. No regular work. Nothing about it should be regular. So let's put that in perspective. Here we are wandering in the wilderness as Jews, right? We're learning about the tabernacle. The tabernacle already is a unique building. It has unique buttresses, unique craftsmen. It has unique oils and incense. We looked at that last week. Unique furniture. It is so unusual it takes several chapters, which we already looked at, to describe, and much longer to fashion. It's elaborate, and it's designed to teach us that nothing is business as usual with the Almighty. So in light of that, what's this reiteration about the Sabbath? What's that all about? It's simply a day off. That's the plain meaning of the text. Obviously, this is not the first mention of Shabbat in Bible. In fact, it's the brackets around the giving of the law. It's mentioned in the creation account, but not by name. It's called the seventh day. It's not called the Sabbath, not until the book of Exodus. So that's the beginning of it. And in chapter 35, we see it again. But this is the framework around the tabernacle instruction that makes it, the Sabbath, so significant. From chapter 20 in the Decalogue, or the Ten Commandments, to this reference here in chapter 31, we see the teaching about the Mishkan, the tabernacle. The Sabbath is the bracketing device, and as such is linked, I think, to the construction. Some use this idea of Sabbath and the tabernacle to mean that Sabbath is a time for worship. I don't fault those people who say that, but I don't see that anywhere in the Bible. Sabbath was designed for rest and refreshment from daily efforts. There's never a time where it says, and thou shalt go to church, or meet up at synagogue. You won't find that anywhere. And Paul wrote that to the Romans, that some men regard one day above another, other people regard every day alike. Let every man do as he's purposed in his heart unto the Lord. And that phrase, unto the Lord, is key. We've seen it in Exodus many times, and it's even here in our text tonight. It's one Hebrew word, Ladonai, unto the Lord. And this idea of being a priest to the Lord, or observing whatever unto the Lord, that is so huge. And we've got to embrace that, or else we're all going to say, oh, we got to go to Jerry's place, or we got to go to Rochelle's place. We've got to all be at the same place. I had a Jewish believer, I've only met her once, who rang the office about a month ago, and she was new. We just began speaking, and she said, where do you all gather together? I said, well, you're Jewish. You can come to our Thursday class, or once a month we have the one new man gathering. Yeah, but where do you all go on Sunday? I said, well, some go on Saturday, some go on Sunday. Oh, you all don't go together? Oh, I need to come and talk to you. And she wanted to come and tell me that we all needed to go to her place. And I thought, thank you. That's really kind. Of course, that's not going to happen. One, this is Sydney, and you're across the bridge. So good luck with that. But this whole idea of we have to, once a week, go to a place is definitely what she believed. And she got, and from Romans 14, what am I supposed to do? Let every man do. Let her do as she's purposed in her heart, Ladonai. Sure, you believe that? Go for it. You celebrate God, you do that. And some say every day is the same. Worship takes on wider meaning than a singing of a few songs. So this idea of worship being a 1-hour service is, I think, somewhat silly. And I agree that worship is our being and how we acknowledge God. All right. But somehow Sabbath is designed for rest and refreshment 44 times in the Older Testament we read this phrase, which is twice in our text tonight, Mot Yumat. Mot Yumat. You know what it means?
Something to do with death?
Yeah, it's dyingly dead. It's you shall surely die. That was in Genesis 2, and it's the prohibition against eating from the wrong tree. And then Satan's taunting denial that Eve would not die, it's used again. And then the souls that sin in Ezekiel chapter 33, the warnings are clear. Death is not escape. You will dyingly die. It's when the Hebrew repeats, it's amplifying. Dyingly dead means you're not going to escape. They say the only two things that are inevitable are death and taxes. But some, as Joe Hockey has said, avoid taxation. No one escapes dying, though. So the warning here is not about the inevitability of death as a permanent finality. That is a lesson, but it's not what's found here. What's found here is the warning of disobedience. So any one Israelite who disobeys and disregards the Sabbath, that person will dyingly die. And it sounds like an immediate justice will be meted out to him. This commentator said this: if even Yahweh stopped to catch his breath after 6 days of customary labor, so also should Israel. And in that stopping, as Israel came to know Yahweh, Israel would come also to know themselves. Now that's a really great way to understand Sabbath. Take a day off. The chosen day does not abrogate all the other days. The chosen day is designed to teach us about God and about the chooser and the chosen activities in life He has for us. Durham says that keeping the Sabbath then is a function of self-actualization. Or better said, if we take time with God and not our labors, then we will be refreshed and developed as people to uniquely serve a unique God. When I brought out this book, Rich Robinson's book, came out this year in May. It's a brilliant book on Christ in the Sabbath, and all the references to Sabbath and what Sabbath's about, and how you're not to be yoked by it, but guided by it. Such a difference, isn't it? I speak at a lot of churches, and even Saturday churches, so Seventh-day Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, Messianic places, I'll go the world. And I often get this question at a Seventh-day place: do you believe in the Sabbath? Or when do you all have your Sabbath meetings? Or, one of those questions. I say, look, there are two kinds of Seventh-day Adventists. Which one are you? And people right away want to know, well, what are the two kinds? And the two kinds are this: those who believe in the Sabbath and those who believe in Yeshua. And you hear that, and you understand. They say to me, oh, well, Yeshua kept the Sabbath. And I think, okay, you're a Sabbath person. And if they say, yeah, I believe in Yeshua, then they're a Yeshua person. And honestly, it's that small of a nuance that really tells you whether somebody is struggling in following God because they love God or because they just want to enjoy, or whether they are trapped by a legal expression of compliance to a God who's never happy with them, from whom they're always seeking approval. You hear that and you will know which one they are and which one you are. So I encourage you, I recommend, yes, of course, Yeshua kept the Sabbath. Yes, of course, you should keep the Sabbath. Is it Friday night from 6:49:32 seconds, or is it sometime Friday night to sometime Saturday night? Is it the spirit of the thing? Is it take time off, take your watch off, relax, enjoy God, enjoy life? I mean, people who don't work for a living, who are either retired, what does it mean, don't do regular work? I don't do any regular work, would say a retired guy. Or those who don't have a job, right? So what does it mean? What it means is don't do your regular stuff. You read Isaiah 58 about how do I do fasting. It's not only about what you don't eat, it's about providing for others. So it might be about making other people's lives easier somehow. You have to work that out between you and God, and if there's a gathering you go to, so be it. Anyway, Rich Robinson's book will be a great help, I think, to you if you want to pick that up later. And the third section tonight is just one line long. verse 18, Ketuvim Bezalel, written by the finger of God. You know the story of God going to the nations of the world and asking if they wanted a commandment? You remember? You want to tell it?
God went to every nation of the world.
The Edomites.
He went first to the Egyptians. He told all the Egyptians, I got some commandments for you. He says, would you like to keep them? The head of the Egyptians said, what's one of them? He says, you shall not steal. He says, no, we can't accept your commandments. We live by stealing. We don't want your commandments. So he went to the Assyrians. He says, what is one of your commandments? And he said, you shall not kill. And he says, we can't. We are a fearsome warrior tribe. He says, we live by killing. We need to kill. So therefore we can't take your commandments. So God apparently went to every nation of the world. The Chinese, the Indians, the Americans and all that. Everyone came up with one commandment that they didn't want. So then when he came to Moses on Mount Sinai with the Israelites, he says, Moses, would you like some of my commandments? And Moses said to him, how much does it cost? God says, it's free. He says, give me 10.
Okay, joke aside, the commandments of God are worth our attention. They were written according to the last verse of our chapter, Bezalel, by the finger of God. Do you remember anything else that the finger of God did in history? Writing on the wall, good. The magicians in Egypt said that the miracles done to them, the fingers, Exodus 8, verse 19, were the finger of God. But I'm thinking of two other events, both are in the Newer Testament. The first one is in Luke 11, verse 20. It's a quote of Yeshua. He said this, if I cast out demons by the finger of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. His miracles, his healing, his deliverance of people were direct evidence of the same finger of God as was the deliverance of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. So now the other event about which we want to speak tonight is Yeshua and his finger. And it's in John chapter 8. And there's a woman caught in adultery. And she's brought before Yeshua. Let's look there. So you wonder, what's he writing? Is he just doing that? If you've ever been involved in, can you imagine you're on Q&A on Monday night and the crowd and Tony are pointing something at you like a microphone. They're throwing hostile questions at you and they ask you a tough question. Generally, if you're on radio or you're on TV, you're going to repeat the question. You're going to say something like, it's a good question. And all the while you're processing, what in the world am I going to say to that guy? That's a good question. I need to stall. I need to think. So you write down a couple thoughts and you say, here, a couple things come to mind. You know, you're stalling. You're trying. Is that what Yeshua is doing? By writing, kind of scribbling and not sure what he's doing. He stoops. He writes down. Look at what he said in verse 7. He who's without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. Where's that in the Torah? That's not anywhere in there. You don't have to be sinless to keep Israel sinless. They're complying with biblical data, so he's actually elevating the bar by saying the people who are going to be the executioners also have to be without sin. He's actually making the justice system higher than it ever was before. Yes. In ancient Israel, there were 2 or 3 witnesses have to be called to testify about anything. Probably still to this day we need corroborators to make sure that something is true in any magistrate's court or any barrister knows that. You have to bring a good couple. You can't just have one guy, he said, she said kind of thing. So you need a couple witnesses. But what they did in biblical days would be that, let's say we caught Susie in adultery. Well, the people who brought testimony would also be the executioners. So if Bill and Fred were the witnesses that dobbed her in, they also had to be the guys who'd go up onto, this was how they did execution of stoning. There were 4 kinds of compensating judicial executions in those days. Stoning was one of 4. Hanging was another, burning. So the stoning, they would put here's a quarry of rocks. And in the middle of that quarry, say she's 5 foot tall, they'd put a 10-foot tall pedestal on which then the 2 guys, Bill and Fred, would walk out onto the pedestal as well as Susie. Bill and Fred would then push her into the quarry, thus breaking her neck. And Bill and Fred would be the first 2 to throw the stones onto her because they were the witnesses. And their testimony is what they... So you couldn't just testify and walk away. You also had to bring the execution. Somewhere along the line, if you're lying, you're going to pull out and say, I perjured myself. I don't want to bring death on another person. So it's a brilliant system that prevents wrong justice being applied. So he says, now it's not just Bill and Fred who caught her. He says, unless Bill and Fred are holy, you can't even touch up a rock to throw her. Okay, so he's elevating the justice system beyond Bill and Fred. But he's writing. And when, verse 9, they heard it, they began to go out one by one. Who's they? These are the accusers. These are the guys. This is the mob who slowly leave one by one, beginning with the older ones. That's an odd phrase. Why would old guys?
The older ones were the wisest.
Supposed to be.
And because they went, the younger ones followed suit.
And the woman was left there. He's left alone with the woman where she was in the center of the court. Straightening up, Yeshua said to her, Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you? She said, No one. It's her. Yeshua said, I don't condemn you either. Go, from now on, sin no more. So the woman is caught in adultery and she's brought before him. And when they threw her in front of him, Yeshua stooped on the ground to draw or write on the ground. God in Exodus wrote on stones. Yeshua here writes on dirt. What did he write? I'm convinced that what he was writing was the sins of the people who accused the woman by writing the commandments they broke. How do I get that? From Jeremiah 17. So we're going to have to go there. Jeremiah 17. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. It's in verse 13. Jeremiah 17, verse 13. Jeremiah 17 is filled with many famous quotes that you might remember. Verse 5, Cursed is the man who trusts in mankind and makes flesh his strength. Verse 7 is the center point of the entire Older Testament. Number of phrases, verses on one side and the other are equal. And it's one of those great songs that you might want to learn one day. Jeremiah 17:7. Baruch HaGever asher yivtach ba'Adonai v'haya Adonai miyivtacho. It's also in the benching, the grace after meals. We sing that. Very famous. Verse 9, one of those great words, the heart is more deceitful than all else and desperately sick. Who can know it? This is one of those things where you think, oh, my heart's pretty clean. No, you don't even know your own heart. You're deceiving yourself. It's desperately wicked. We are a tarnished people. That's what Jeremiah is saying. But in the midst of all this, God says, I search the heart. And in verse 13, he says this famous phrase, O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written down in the earth. Our version has it a little different. Those who turn away on earth will be written down. But just put the phrase back where it goes, and it says that we will be written in the earth, ba'aretz. So the people who turn away from God are written down in the earth. That's where I get. Yeshua is writing down in the earth those who turn away. So he's writing
names.
Ezra.
He's not in the names.
Yeah, he's writing their name. So he starts with the older guys. He writes...
Would you know all their names? There's so many of them.
Well, it's a village, so maybe not. So there goes the good doctor who's across the street, right? And he'd write Dr. Nathan. And then he'd write Greed, say. Or Ezra. Murder. I'll just say murder because you haven't killed anybody. He'd write the name of the guy, and then those who do wrong, he's writing them down. And I think he's writing with his finger the same way he wrote the 10 Commandments. I think he's writing the commandments. No wonder the older fellows drop their stones. No wonder no one says, ooh, I'm without sin, I'll throw the first stone. Because Yeshua alone can accuse people because he alone has no sin. But he's not throwing stones. He's helping them drop theirs. He's raising mercy above judgment. He is bringing his life, his kingdom, his rule in the midst of an unruly situation. Isn't that brilliant? He might have been writing, thou shalt not murder, or thou shalt not bear false witness, or thou shalt love thy neighbor, or any number of commandments that he found the men breaking that day. The Bible says that one by one, beginning with the older, they began to go out. The older ones knew their sins and admitted them faster than the hot-headed younger ones. God's finger wrote justice for the men and liberating forgiveness for the woman that day. God's finger still writes God's law in our days. He writes the laws on our hearts of flesh. He writes them in the consciences of people who have hearts and ears to hear what His message is to humanity. I hope you're a person who wants to know God's ordinances. I hope you want to know God personally. If so, then the commandment and the choice and the Sabbath and the love and the God of it all is available to you and for you, and ultimately for Him and for His glory. So here are some lessons I gathered from tonight's fairly short chapter. Number 1, God's wish for elaborate things in His sanctuary is proper and still right for His people today. He likes, secondly, beauty and glory. Those are worthy descriptions of the Almighty and things He does. So when you stand at the ocean and you say, awesome, He likes that, I think. 2, beauty and glory are worthy descriptions of the Almighty. Number 3, no man is an island, and we need one another to work in God's work. Number 4, Sabbath is given for man, not man for the Sabbath, its rules, its duties, its complications. Number 5, take a day off and rest in God each week. And number 6, God's finger writes His laws and His purposes in humanity, even as He writes His life into you.
You've been listening to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus in Australia. For more information, contact Jews for Jesus, Post Office Box 925, Sydney, Australia 2001. God bless you.